a large population captured were childbearing women and young men.
Thank you. We got to the transatlantic slave trade. Perfect. Because we've talked about this part per se, right? We've talked about how it made a triangular trade. So when the I just gave it away. Who was the first to take Africans from the New World? Portugals. They bring it from Africa to the New World. This is where, and again, you don't have to know the names of this. This is just a map to show you. But this, so when the Portuguese figure out how to get down the coast, these are from all the areas that Africans will be taken from. As we talked about, they can be marched up to 300 miles to the coast, right? And then, so this part right here is called the Middle Passage. First stopping in the Caribbean to see if they need any slaves there, as we will see. And then on to the North American coast, up back to Europe to take all their money, and more slaves are going to sell there, back there, back. So it makes this, it's not a perfect, isosceles triangle or anything of that nature, but transatlantic slave trade, also known as the triangular trade, but it's going to be hell. Excuse the language, but it's hell on earth. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of slaves will be taken at a time. And not only is this how they're going to be forced to be kept on the ships in these cramped conditions, it's what they go through, along the journey, along the passage, that makes it, to them, the worst part of the captured experience of all. But we're going to start with our video, telling you. I'm going to auction the whole thing, just a piece of it. Here we go. Of what it was like.
The slave trade developed in this triangular form out of initially Spanish and Portuguese merchants taking Africans to the Atlantic Islands. When they needed to develop ports in places like Brazil and the Transilvania, it was almost a natural extension to take Africans who they didn't regard as the sailors themselves. They didn't see them quite as full human beings. There was slavery in Africa before Europeans arrived, but I think it was a different sort of slavery. It's sometimes described as a more domestic type slavery, where slaves were often part of the household, and they were treated with the same degree of brutality and violence, of really being dehumanised in the form of slavery that we're talking about in America, what we now call chattel slavery. People had their names taken away from them.
I have with me a document from the slave register in St. Kitts, and this shows a list of the names that were given to the Africans. Their African names were removed. And one of these names is Loki. He's written down, a 14-year-old boy, his job is to look after cattle, and he's written down as Loki. I've seen other names like this too, like gift or property.
The slave trade developed out of the need for labour in the Americas to grow sugar, and it developed into what was known as the triangular trade. And ships from places like Liverpool went out to the coast of West Africa, taking goods, which were then traded on the coast for enslaved Africans.
The picture we're looking at here shows Liverpool at the beginning of the slave trade in 1725. Already we have the first dock built in 1715, and we have the customs house in 1722. The warehouses that were built here stored the tropical goods that were brought over in the ships. These were the ships that had travelled on the transatlantic route.
The Middle Passage took about 6 to 8 weeks under normal circumstances. One of the voyages that we know about was in a ship called the Zonk, which was a Liverpool ship which left Liverpool in 1780. And the captain had a problem on board that a number of his enslaved Africans who were very sick and dying. And he knew that the more slaves that died, the less the profit was going to be for the his own resident himself. So that he thought, well, if they died from other causes, then I could claim insurance. So that he told the rest of the crew that they'd reached the water and suggested that they throw some of the Africans overboard. And over 3 days they threw overboard 130 Africans. And then when the ship got back to England, they claimed insurance on those slaves. And that led to a court case. But the insurers lost. I think the case of the Zong was very unusual, but I don't think that should stop us really remembering that the Middle Passage was a very brutal and difficult experience for enslaved Africans.
Local acts like these were used to stop any African slaves from moving around. As you can see, that would be hammered into there by blacksmiths once the thread had been put through. These were absolutely necessary places like the Middle Passage, where you have slaves who were struggling to be free, which they were at all times. I think we tend to forget that, that these people were fighting every step of the way.
We know of many cases where some of the Africans prefer to jump overboard and commit suicide rather than stay on board the vessel. We also now know that there was an attempted insurrection attempted to revolt by the Africans on about 1 in 10 voyages.
Pick up with that now.
Images.
Lecture. So the Zonk is the most famous case about the Minch being lost, quote unquote, big quotes, at sea. But it was definitely not the only. That was incredibly normal. Slaves would be beaten, slaves would be worked to death, slaves would be just treated and placed and forced to be in the most horrific of conditions that they would die, frequently. They would die constantly. And or things were so bad that they would jump overboard and commit suicide because they couldn't imagine living the rest of their lives in these conditions. So if you have a handful, maybe a dozen or so you lose along the way, either they commit suicide and or they try to revolt. Now they will be kept in lock and chain for the entire time. Hands shackled, feet shackled. But I want to hit this one. Here we go. So it would be shackled. They would, hands and feet. The most menial food per se. They'll be forced to work, and they're shackled day in and day out, so that they can't try and rebel. They can't. They can try, but their hands and feet are clasped, so it's gonna be easy to overtake and dominate them. They would be forced to work for their keep, mopping the decks, cleaning the boats. But also, if you get to the slave and you've got skinny, malnourished Africans, it's so weird to say, slave malnourished, anyway, they're not going to bring you as much money as you want, right? You got to keep them physically fit, physically in shape. So they would also be forced to partake in hours of daily activity, what they called dancing, per se. They would tell the slaves to dance. And basically, it's running in place, it's jumping jacks, it's this physical movement. And there were heavy pieces of elements on the ship that the men would have to be forced to use as weights. But so they get on the sun, they get physical activity, but the treatment of them is just horrific. It went on day after day after day. And at night, we saw our picture. They were forced to lay, and sleep. And if they weren't up on board working, or if they weren't dancing or exercising, well, that's the conditions where they were kept all the time, down in the holes, in the dark. And it was, can you imagine being in that for 48 days straight. And if one gets sick in those conditions, many will get sick. They say 15 to 25% of a shipload would be lost at sea. The only reason the Zonk got caught, because their Africans had gotten sick, there was a virus sweeping through the ship, they threw the dead overboard, or the dying. If they thought they were going to lose them, they just bound their hands and feet and throw them overboard into the ocean. But the problem is when the Zonk got back to Europe, they try to claim insurance on them. And when you claim they make an insurance claim and the issue is legally looked into, what they had technically done was found, they're the only ship that got in any type of legal problem, or got any type of legal ramifications for it whatsoever. But just a nightmare, a completely atrocious nightmare. Yeah, we'll hit this one. Actually, no, I just told you that all that info. Let's go straight to here. So, as we're fixing to see, they're going to start again. First, they stop at the Caribbean because of sugar, which we're fixing to talk about, the Caribbean sugar islands. But once they had stopped at the Caribbean sugar islands to see if anybody, the Dutch, the Spanish, the English, etc., needed slaves, they would take the rest onto the main coast. Now, again, as we're fixing to see, Carolina, both Carolinas are fixing to be formed. But Carolina, as we're also going to see, starts out as just Carolina, one big old massive colony. And then they find they love half of the colony, they hate the other half of the colony, which is crazy because both of them are landscapically beautiful. They're going to cut in half, north and south. And the one that they hate has to earn its keep some way, somehow, right? If they want to claim it in the land and it's got to earn its keep, well, this colony will become devoted to slave auctions. Again, we'll see which one of those, if it's north or south here in a second. So on into the Caribbean, onto the main coast, these slaves would be taken into these auctions, but they weren't just slave auctions. It was basically a livestock auction per se. So these people either were completely nude, or the men might be allowed, the women might be allowed to cover just their private areas, but if it's women, they weren't allowed to cover their tops. They might have some type of cloth around their bottoms. That's it, no shoes, nothing of that magnitude. And they're thrown into this auction pit. So they're in there with the livestock. They're in there with the horses. They're in there with the cattle. They're in there with the sheep and goats. You know, in the mud and the manure, and getting stepped on, and just migrating around with all these livestock. And you would have, now once slavery, as the more and more slavery takes off, there will become just pure slave auctions, don't get me wrong. But in the beginning stages, so the Portuguese, before Spain gets in, by the time Spain gets into this thing, they bring slaves over to the New World. They'll just be strictly slave auctions. But in these initial stages, when the Portuguese are first bringing them over, you know, we don't have set up slave auctions. That industry had to be built. So they would be in these livestock auctions. You might have a cow, a bull brought up on the platform, auctioned off, and then you have a slave. And then you have horses, and you have a slave. I mean, they were just treated like livestock. They were treated like property. The word people, in terms of a word that describes them, the word people got cut out immediately upon arriving on the mainland. I mean, just go grotesque as the day is long. And the biggest attribute, too, we talked about the type of people that were taken, right? Adult men, women who were in their childbearing years, because again, if we can get babies out of them, free slaves, teenagers per se. If you came over and there were obviously close-knit ties, emotional ties, family ties, the goal to break their spirits as much as possible in this thing would be to split families apart. Split you apart from your loved ones, again, just to break you down even further. And so I'm just throwing out names, so really these colonies haven't been built yet, or hold slaves, but go with me. Let's just say one slave gets sold to South Carolina. The other one might go to Virginia, one might go to Rhode Island. By the way, there were no slaves in Rhode Island, but you get the point. Spread them off, separate them as much as can be. And this is when the whole slavery industry will come to be. Either working in, for the English, we're talking about England, working in the tobacco fields up in the Chesapeake region, or in the Caribbean sugar islands. The very, very, very lucky few might find themselves in some type of position as a cook, or a housekeeper, or an artisan per se. You might have a carpenter or a blacksmith who comes to buy a slave, and it's a lifelong relationship. He owns you the entire life, but you at least work alongside your boss, you learn a skill, you're not out in the fields night and day. So there were a few lucky ones who might find other avenues, but 98% of them will find themselves in some type of agricultural production. And it's when the horrificness of slavery inside North America, in terms of, the Spanish are doing it, but in terms of the English, in terms of us, is when it truly begins. It's just ridiculous. So by the early 1700s, when England finally dips a toe in that slavery pool, right? and then explode. By 1700, when we're the #1 leading country in North America, we're also the #1 leading slaveholding industry. #1 leading country in terms of the slave industry. Now we'll jump on this Native American bandwagon too, but the percentage of slavery across the board will have dropped from all Native American to 20% Native American, 80% African. Millions upon millions a year will come over. And again, we first stop at the Caribbean Sugar Islands. Guess what? That will end up being the economic jewel of the Caribbean. Economic hotspot. As we're fixing to see, sugar is going to make England more money than their entire tobacco production combined. Anybody remember just off the top of their heads how much tobacco we're cultivating by 1670? 20 million. All right, somebody say it. Yeah, we got the 2 right. We got the 2 right. 20 million pounds a year, right? We're going to own 1/4 of the Caribbean Sugar Island. It'll make us more money than the tobacco. There is so much money behind sugar. And of course, it's kind of funny because by the time we discover the Caribbean Sugar Islands, we're going to be the country with the last horse in the race, per se. France, Spain are already there, but so is Holland, by the way, the Dutch. The Dutch are there, making money off of this crop known as sugar. And this is when you really hate being a map maker in this day and age, people. Let's just say. So England decides they want a piece of the freaking pie. You come over and you have, since this war, control of who controls what, right? And you'll end up with Spain here, France holding a huge piece, Holland here, us here. A map maker, and this is just an example, but you have a map maker come over. He's got to map out who's where, got to draw the lines, draw the boundaries, map the whole thing out. Then he's got to go back to England to print and make this official. Well, by the time he gets back to England, guess what? There's been another battle for supremacy because other countries who have small pieces want larger. So now Holland may control this chunk, with Spain here, England here, France here. Mapmaker comes back over, has to remap the entire island, chart the whole new thing. He gets back to make his maps. Well, guess what? It's changed again. We see issues over control of the island shift hands and borders a few times, but eventually we will get to where everyone's content with what they own. And again, it's a wonderful true-false question for, an exam. The tiny piece that we have in the Caribbean Sugar Islands will make us more money than that 20,000 pounds of tobacco a year. Because people use it and want it for everything. Absolutely everything, per se. Some of this stuff, again, makes sense. Some of it I find comical. Obviously, we eat it, right? We sprinkle it on our cookies. We use it for desserts, etc., etc. We use it in cooking. But did you know that was their primary condiment they put on everything? There was no ketchup. There was no mayonnaise. There was no pickle relish. There was no Tabasco for a long, long time. So you go to Joe's over here, and you order yourself one of their pizzas. They're delicious. They bring it to you, and they say, would you like some sugar to put on top of that? Yes, please. You put sprinkle sugar on their pizzas. You know to put sugar on your hot dog? They'll put it on everything. It enhances the flavor. They're like sweet. So put it on everything, which sounds weird to us, but again, they didn't have the variety we did in this day and age when they loved the taste of sugar. Obviously, it will enhance medicine, right? Or so they believe. I shouldn't say enhance it, but it will help it go down, right? Because now we have these little things called antibiotics. We have pills that we take a swig of water and we swallow without even having to taste it. But if you get that pill sits on your tongue for just a minute, oh my God, right? Imagine when you would have to drink it straight out of the bottle, and you have to drink big amounts of it, right? Bigger amounts of it. Well, a lot of times, it's like drinking too much tequila at a time. It might hit that bottom and turn around and come straight back up, right? Your stomach starts to turn and it comes back up. So if you taste it with a spoonful of sugar, it helps you from throwing your medicine up. Hashtag spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Where do you think Walt Disney got that from, right? It's a little lovely movie named Mary Poppins. That's the right thing. That's true. A spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down. And I love this one too. Now we have marble statues. Now we have, you go to a dance or a prom or a wedding, and you might have a ice sculpture. It says ice swan in the middle or something else. What if everything was made out of sugar? You would have sugar swans. You would have sugar, bust in your home until marble really took over. You would have busts of, maybe of your own selves in your home made out of sugar. You went to a dinner party and you would have sugar figurines on the table. Having sugar figurines or busts or sculptures made out of sugar was a silent bragging of your wealth because sugar was so expensive. So you was just saying, guess how much money I have, don't you wish you were me? Kind of flaunting your wealth per se. But again, on one side, sugar can melt if it gets wet, right? It does disintegrate. And it kind of attracts insects, things like ants and other lovely things. Of course, back in that day and age, that wasn't the worst deal. So it's just different times, people, different times. But there's a variety of reasons for it. And again, we cannot cultivate enough of it. But who's ever messed? Has anybody ever really messed with sugarcane? Isn't it just this really easy, fun crop to mess with? Oh yeah, it just breaks in two in your hands, right? Oh my God, guys, it is tough, it is thick, it is coarse, it is, I've messed with it before, I cut my hand. It's not fun. It is not a fun product to harvest. So God forbid that we have to do the work, we have to put the effort in, we might get cut, blisters or cuts on our hands. No, that's not for us. That's what slaves are for. I thought this 12 years, every time I'm like, that's just weird. But that was the true reality of the case. So you'll have over 1 million slaves alone, just in the Caribbean Sugar Islands. Which is why the Portuguese, and then Spanish, once they get to the slave trade, because they'll jump on this thing next when they figure out that's a thing that they can make money at, they stop at the Caribbean first. Does anybody need any slaves? Yes, then, sell us off as many as they can. And then onto the coast of the Carolina, right? So we have, in this day and age, we have the Chesapeake region completely created. We have got, Virginia. We've got, the Chesapeake area. We've got Delaware, per se. And that is just exploding with nothing but tobacco. But we don't just want the only thing people come over for is to grow tobacco, right? Some people want to come over and do something else besides grow tobacco with their lives. So we need room for more people to come over. Now, chapter 4 is massively devoted to the religious chapters that come over. Our separatists, aka pilgrims, our Quakers, and our Puritans, and they will go north, as we will see. They will be everywhere from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, all up in that region. But we also know, so again, this is all happening in the same time frame. The chapters just cover them in different chapters. So either, we do have people coming over. We have religious sections forming up north. We also know that there is still land between Virginia and where Spain is right now down in Georgia. Right? Which, by the way, we will get Georgia in chapter 3. Anybody's looked at your first test review yet? I have you reading over how we acquired Georgia, because that will occur in this time period too. But long story short, we do know there is this chunk of land between us and Spain there for the taking. So 3 men will go down, one of them away, by the way, a bully, kind of the villain, I should say, there's the word I was looking for, a Bacon's Rebellion, that one you're reading over in your book on your own. I'm just saying he might destroy an complete entire colony, because of a few, just saying. But long story short, William Berkeley, John Colton, a few others will come down, claim the rest of the land, all the way to the Georgia border. Claim this huge chunk of land from Virginia down, in the name of their now king, Charles I. And they're going to call it Carolina. One big freaking colony, right? But so once we've claimed all this land and the name of our king, we hereby name this colony Carolina in the name of Charles I. We find that half of this colony, we adore. We absolutely adore. We think it is just God's gift to England. Holy crap, look what we found, right? The other half are like, who in God's name would live here? What is the point of this? So you're going to split it in half. We're going to have north and south. Think about the terrain they're interested in. Think about what we do to make money in this day and age. Which half, you got 50-50 shot, which half do they love, which half do they hate? Which half do they love?
South.
South, very good. Why?
North is more rocky, right? More mountains.
Exactly. South, guys, is flat for the most part. Plus, they're going to find the rivers and the ocean, the bay, navigatable. A lot easier to get ships in and out of in the 1700s, right? When everything is natural the way it was. But yeah, they're going to fall in love with South Carolina. North Carolina, they're like, who in God's name would live here? Which, by the way, is just absolutely shocking to me. Ex-fiancé number one of them. Parents lived in North Carolina, and we would go up. They lived in this town up in the mountains called Boone. It's beautiful, oh my God, phenomenally gorgeous. But North Carolina is very mountainous. It's very hilly, and you just have to think, as I mean, today we're like, well, that seems dumb. I mean, duh, of course it's possible, but for purposes of agriculture, and what we're looking to do, 300 years ago, basically, more than that, 400 years ago, basically, around that time frame. Who grows crops on the side of a mountain? What good is a mountain? Mountain is just taking up unnecessary space. Sure, they're pretty to look at, but what are their use? What's their purpose? Oh my God, plus they didn't like the rivers. Apparently the rivers were not naturally navigatable as you went north. They did not like the coast. However, it was back in the 1600s, naturally. They did not like. And it's one of those things where we want it in the name of our country. We don't want to lose all this land, but it's going to have to hurt us keep, right? Because nobody who wants to get invested in agriculture. Because there's other things. We have sugar, right, over in the Caribbean. We have tobacco. We also grow things like hemp. We grow rice. Cotton will be an issue here in about 100 years. So we need flat. Plus, this we find the soil of South Carolina way more, fertile and luscious. It is kind of on the tip of this area known as the Black Belt region. They love the coast of South Carolina, etc., etc. So you will see so they split in half. They cut it. Now, this is where the slave auctions will be. Again, you will have like tar. You will have people move here, but they will be kind of your poor, kind of more lower class. Turpentine farmers, producers, tar. Auctions per se, cattle auctions. The Spanish and French are welcome to come if they want, to buy livestock. Primarily the Spanish, since they're right down there in Georgia. Come and buy cattle from our auctions. So that's how North Carolina will earn its keep. This is where Africans will be taken. And then North Carolina will absolutely explode in a few decades with just sole slave auctions. But South Carolina. Again, they thrive. I've already mentioned a bunch of this. I'm sure it all makes sense. This is probably the most important. Because yes, the 95% of the colony will be devoted to agriculture. And again, we are growing rice. We are growing other types of agriculture. Tobacco will primarily remain up in the Virginia-esque Chesapeake area. But we do have other needs. We do have other agricultural wants. So the rest of South Carolina will be devoted to plantations and farms, except for one area right on the coast, because we're also going to import and export from South Carolina, right? The harbors and rivers the harbors are so easy to get into and out of. Makes perfect sense to be the hot spot for importing and exporting for the South. So a big bustling city will be built. This place called, in the name of their king, Charlestown. That city still stands today. That city's pretty cool. It's very historic. It's really cool to go see it all. But if you go from the history nerd side of your being, lots of historical attributes to it. City still stands. We've tweaked the name a little bit, right? Charlestown has become what? Charleston. Charleston, South Carolina. And then again, you will see, we will also acquire Georgia in chapter 3. You're going to read that little blip of how and why. I don't want to give the ending away. So by the time we got North and South Carolina bustling, we're building them. We will also take Georgia from the Spanish. And again, don't forget at the same time frame, again, this is in a different chapter, the North is also being cultivated. The rest of the original 13 colonies, again, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Rhode Island, etc., etc. And so by 1700, this is how alive, with the religious really establishing up north and all the religious going there. Then you've got tobacco, then you've got this Chesapeake, or this lower area, North, South Carolina, Georgia. This is how alive by 1700, we are the predominant #1 land-owning country inside North America. And we're continuing to grow, we're continuing to thrive. We're having hundreds of thousands of people still come over. Spain, not so much. Spain is completely centered on Mexico. And then we have moved into Texas somewhat, but everything above Texas, and we have a few over in California, but the Spanish aren't pouring over by the leaps and bounds. The French are continuing to grow and thrive, but they don't have this urgency and this need for land right now that England does. So this is when we really take over, and we are absolutely kicking butt, taking names, wanting to expand and completely starting over this whole new region that we built. But life is going to be very, very different. Florida is on this map, it's still under Spanish control, not included right now. So from Georgia all the way up here to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, here are your original 13 colonies. Border to border, just the way United States is state to state, right? Because guess what? Those colonies are fixing to be the first 13 states. Then eventually we'll move up north a little bit, but we're going to be invested in going. We'll get Florida too, go west. But life, long story short, those 13 colonies, there's 5 different lifestyles in these 13 colonies that all kind of roll together in a very interesting manner, a very interesting way, just saying. I'm going to skip some slides on the space of time because I would rather get into this after blah, blah, blah. Actually, no, I don't. Where am I going? Which slide do I want to hit? Some of these I'm going to skip space of time. Yep, there. So, again, going back to my map for a second, you're going to have the New England area, your Mid-Atlantic region, your Upper South, and your Lower South, and your backcountry. Again, they're all connected. People, you lock over a line in the sand and you're in a different region, right? But life there is going to be different as night to day as you move from location to location. You will not find slaves, guys, higher than right here. Slavery will literally be from Virginia. You will have a trickle in Maryland. But these 4 colonies right here will be where you find slavery. You won't find them from Pennsylvania up, and we'll talk about why here in a second. But so it's important to know. So these 4 colonies are split into 2 of those regions, right? You have your Upper South, Virginia, North Carolina. You have your Lower South, which is going to be Georgia. Or be Georgia and South Carolina. And again, I have Maryland in here because again, there's a trickle. I mean, there's a handful. But I mean, so there are. We can't count Maryland out, but really, Virginia, North Carolina is considered the heart of your Upper South. And again, Lower South is really where you're going to start to see it take off. And again, there's going to be a difference. Now, again, there are other agricultural things that we grow that slaves will be bought for. The primary one, again, it's not the only one. Guys, it's not the only one. And I'm not going to ask you the numbers, just to give you an idea. Rice really takes off. Rice really takes off in this southern portion. Again, we're in the South, in South Carolina, before the slave industry really takes off, we're going about 12,000 pounds a year. After England jumps on this slavery bandwagon, that goes to 18 million pounds a year. Tells you how many slaves are being bought, right? But if you're a slave and you're sold into one of these colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, depending on whether you end up in the Upper South or the Lower South, is as different as night and day. Again, Lower South is primarily, you see it like just a hair, but primarily South Carolina, Georgia, is the Deep South. And that is where you will see the horrificness of slavery really be born. You see brutality across the board. I mean, it's horrific and it's embarrassing and it's just, atrocious that it's who we used to be and how we used to be. but slaves are treated brutally across the board. However, if you're in that deep South, if you were in that South Carolina, Georgia region, and again, when we get into chapter 13, we rolled down the road 100 years or so, as weird as that is to say. I mean, we really talk about what life was like for a slave, and the different type of brutality, and the torture, and every different element. But again, that's the area you see the birth of that. All slaves, I mean, except for maybe 99% of slaves will be in the field. They will be in the field from sun up to sundown, 363 days a year. Even slaves, put those in quotes, get 2 days a year off. Aren't we nice? This was so nice of us, isn't it? I mean, we're so Christian, right? So as Christians, what days do we give them off?
Easter and Christmas.
Easter and Christmas. Very good. Easter and Christmas, they will get off. But every day, sun up to sundown. We'll take that back. Sunday mornings, they will be forced to go to church. We'll talk about later on. But, I mean, they just live their lives. They live their lives in doing back-breaking work in the cold, in the heat, being overseen by a tenant farmer, their manager per se. And this is where the brutality of it, the grotesqueness of it, the beatings, and the physical abuse and the mental abuse is really born. And that's just 99% of them, this will be their life, is in that lower South. In the upper South, you can find yourself in that same position. But there's a bigger handful that may have more options. Maybe there's a bigger handful that may have a better life than what you just find in the lower South. First off, there's not as many slaves in the upper South. In Virginia, especially Maryland, just keep that in mind, Maryland is small anyway. But in the Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina-esque area, there's just not as many. And you do have plantations, you do have farms. I mean, Virginia is known for tobacco, right? So trust me, the brutality and the awfulness is there too. But there's also different options. Because there's further to the north. There's more as you get into the northern Virginia, and into Maryland, there's more artistry. There's more artisans. And this is where you see a lot of slaves go who will become enslaved blacksmiths, enslaved silversmiths, enslaved carpenters, enslaved tradesmen, where you might know your boss has bought you. You're his for life, but he's working right alongside of you. And you're doing a craft together every day. Now, you're not best buddies. You're not going to go get a beer together after work. And I'm sure he's still not going to be very nice to you. But you get to learn a skill. And you're learning a craft. And you might be indoors. And you see a whole lot more domestic slavery take off up in the northern portion of these colonies too. Again, maids, butlers, nannies, livestock handlers. Someone, you're out there taking care of the horses. So there's more option for you. You might learn a skill, learn a trade. Or you might still find yourself on a tobacco plantation. So it's just different. And the brutality, if you're an artisan, if you're taking care of the horses, or if you're a cook, or if you're an enslaved blacksmith, the brutality, the sheer grotesqueness and domination brutality-wise isn't as bad. So it's just, there's a possibility of it being a little bit easier life for you in the upper South than there is the lower, right?
Wouldn't that be true of every race though? Because it was the South a lot more swampland, a lot harsher territory, a lot more rural than the upper Northeast. You look at bigger cities and a lot more export, whereas down here it's rural. It goes down, make something of yourself.
Sure, but you don't see any immigrants in that part of the country. We're going to talk about immigrants won't go south. You'll either have whites, you'll have the English, or you have slaves, and that's going to be it. And slaves obviously will, and it won't be easy for the whites either, don't get me wrong, but the whites will be, either, they'll be white, but also they won't be doing the work. That's what the slaves are for. So you have more white, you do have more whites and artisans up in the upper, and this is just in regards to the South. So life is harder. But, immigrants will refuse to go into the area for a reason we're talking about in a little bit. So they will either be white or they will be African in this part of the country. All immigrants will go somewhere else originally. Actually, other places originally, as we're fixing to see. But go to the very tip, the Connecticut, Massachusetts, and I'm not going to ask you, to name the colonies on a test, but to give you an idea. I'm more interested in, the most northern portion. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. Immigrants won't go here either because they're not allowed. A religious chapter named the Puritans, who were more pure, we'll see in chapter 4, who were more pure than anybody else, will form the first colony of this bunch, Massachusetts. And then as more and more people come over to live in this area, more and more Puritans come over, the other colonies will be founded, right? Puritans are more pure than anybody else. A, because as we're going to see, and this is just foreshadowing to the core, they believe in the separation of church and state, right? Keeping the Puritan church pure. And as we're going to see, they are the only people that believe this way, so that makes them more pure than anybody else, blah, blah, blah. But they're also, these are the people that none of us would want to be friends with either, because they're very strict. You want to talk about laws, you want to be talked about toughness, you want to talk about our way or the highway type of rule and domination. If you want to live in their area, you're going to abide by their laws. And if you want to live up in this area of the country, you have to be white. You have to be English. And you have to belong to what the Puritans church will become over time, the Congregational faith. It's a chapter of the Puritan faith. So you've got to belong to Congregational church. You can only be from England, and you have to be white. Hashtag no slaves up there, you've got to be white. No immigrants if you're not English. And again, it's very strict. It's very structured. It's impressive. On one hand, it is impressive, as we will see. But I mean, their laws, they have so many laws. Oh my gosh, strictest parents in the freaking world, have so many laws. And if you break one of their laws, you're either expelled from the community originally, or you're hung, or you might be burned at the stake. Anybody want to live here? As we're going to see it, so it says strict in culture, but you step over a line into the sand, and you have the middle, from New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware. And guess what? You just step over that line in the sand, and it's a completely different lifestyle. Guess what, guys? Everybody is welcome. Hands down, no-brainer. Everybody's welcome. Another religious chapter might found the first colony of this area, Pennsylvania. Hashtag the Quakers, William Penn. And then as more and more people come over, the other colonies will be formed, will be founded. This is where you'll see 85 to 90% of immigrants go. Because from the day William Penn founded Pennsylvania, the rule here was everybody is welcome. It doesn't matter if you're blue, brown, polka dot, zebra striped, black, white, silver, sparkling. Everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter. It's like that freaking Backstreet Boys song, right? I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you did. Which, by the way, I kind of think that's funny. What you did, okay. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what your lifestyle is. You come on in, right? You could be Congregational. You could be Catholic. You could be Puritan. You could be agnostic. Come on in. So this is what you will find again the heart of immigration. And guess what? They don't believe in slavery. When Quakers found Pennsylvania, I mean, obviously, as we're going to see, there won't be any slavery up here. Slavery will not be allowed. It's kind of like the number one big rule as these colonies get founded. So you don't see, slavery isn't allowed here. Africans are welcome higher because they're not white. Immigrants will make up the primary lower class labor group per se, because there's still a need for labor. Immigrants will find work here. But immigrants, again, will not go south. They will not go from Maryland down for a long time out of fear. Think about how immigrants, who, again, we're talking 1650, 1660, 360 years ago, 340 years ago. Immigrants come over and they view how how these portions of the countries are being founded. And slavery is coming to dominate what's right underneath them, right? What does slavery look like? What makes up a slave? What is slavery? What type of people make up slavery? Well, what are Africans?
Different color skin.
Yeah, different color skin, different culture, different part of the world, different language, different skin, different characteristics, different language, different lifestyles. There's no set standard in the 1600s of why Africans alone are enslaved. to a lot of these people who are coming from all different countries, coming to the New World knowing nothing about it, except it's the land of the free, and there's opportunity, they set foot. Well, people from different areas, different lifestyles, different countries, different cultures, down south are being enslaved. And no, there's no real explanation as to why that could not happen to them. So if you're white or you're black in the South, if you're an owner or you're a slave, and you have no idea what might happen to you if you go south, because you're different skin color, different culture, different language, not white, not on the same level as the English, what if that happens to you too? So for a long time, now eventually that will fade. Eventually we will see, but this is just, we're talking about how the 13 colonies originated, right? Over time, yes, that will change, but off the bat, initially, there's fear. But again, so you'll find 85 to 90% right here. Now, where does that other 10-15% go? They can't go north. They're not white. They're not from England. They can't go south. They're out of fear of slavery. They go, where are they going to the south? They go to the back country. Where is the back country? Let's go back to our map for a second. All in here. And then they'll migrate down and west. All out where there is nothing. Where they can come over. They'll be the first immigrants to go west, for people to go west. And they're going to settle right outside the colonies. They're not going far from civilization. They're not going to go far from where they're welcome, per se. But they're going to go and they're going to start over. They're going to make little mini countries, cultures, communities of their lifestyle. You might go, you venture out a little bit west, go a little bit west from Pennsylvania, and you might find this community built out in the woods that's Irish. They still, they've created their own little community, their own little town, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But they've all come down together, where they still hold on to the elements and the traits of their culture. They still have brought over instruments. They still play music that they wouldn't really find in their country. They still cook food that they would primarily eat in their country. Still dress, still carry the same traits. There's no pressure to reform. They can hold on to who they are, where they come from, and still hold on to what makes them them. But they are in a land where they have freedom to start over. And then again, they're not far from, town and civilization, to where if they need things, they can go in. But they, it's kind of like a hermit. You prefer to live out for the most part. And a prime example of this, and again, they didn't come over and found this in the 1600s per se, but a prime example of what I'm talking about can be found about 3-ish hours from here, down in hill country, off of 35 or 67. Where am I talking about? Search with an F. Fredericksburg. Have we been to Fredericksburg? Nobody's been to Fredericksburg? Oh my gosh. Y'all would say y'all are missing out, but you're also not missing out, because if you go to Fredericksburg, you're going to come out like hundreds of dollars later of shopping. Happens every time. Fredericksburg now is the coolest little town, but it was originally formed by the Germans. Way back when they came back over, don't ask me hard off the top of my head to remember when Fredericksburg was founded, but that's exactly what the people in the hill country did. They settled this area, and they built their own little town. They built their own community out in the hill country, the Germans did, down in Texas. And that's where the Germans formed and settled during the days, by the way, when Spain still owned Texas. If you go there now, now it's this, now the town of Fredericksburg is larger than just the little central downtown hotspot. But if you go to Fredericksburg, you're going for the little central downtown hotspot, or for the camping and hiking. Camping and hiking in Fredericksburg is phenomenal. That's why we go. We'll take the horses and we'll go overnight, because there's areas where you can keep your, anyway. But then you go into the little mild downtown hotspot, and the shopping is, oh my god, phenomenal. There's wineries every other store, by the way. And you can you can drink and carry. So the more wine you drink, the more wine you drink, the more stores you go into, the more you shop. They're smart people. But on the flip side of it, if you go into the restaurants, or you go into a lot of these stores, or a lot of these businesses, they still dress in German clothing. Their uniforms are German clothing. Restaurants, you have your chicken fingers if you're eating your hot dogs if you don't want to try it, but they primarily serve German food. The taverns and stuff, if you want your Michelob Ultras, low calorie, Bud Lights, whatever, you can get that too, but they serve 9% of German beer, holding the historical part of it still alive. German music is played in the clubs and things at night. You'll have, musicians, German musicians out on the street, and it's keeping alive and demonstrating why it was there in the first place. It is really cool though. I'm just saying. We go over to go Christmas shop every year, we spend way too much money. We drink way too much wine. But so these are areas that make the 13 colonies. This is why we go from have a horse in the race to this country who's fixing to kick butt and take names not too long from now, declare independence. But that is where chapter 3 comes to an end. And I'll tell you what, here's the deal. We still have to hit chapter 4. We're a little behind. So we're going to push. I'll figure out the rest of the semester, but not like it's a big deal. But anyway, we're going to push the first test back. Your first test will not be a week from Thursday at this point. If you want to go ahead and start planning for it, make your adjustments if you have it, your schedule written down. Your first test will be a week from Tuesday, and Thursday we'll hit the first half of chapter 4. Be free, little birds. Go have a lovely Tuesday, and I will see you people on Thursday.
When you say a week from Tuesday, you mean the following Tuesday? A week from?
No, your test was supposed to be a week from today. So we're pushing it back a class period. It'll be a week from Thursday instead of a week from Tuesday. Yeah, because we'll hit the first half on Thursday, the other half on Tuesday, and then the test will be Thursday.
Go through your YouTube, and no matter what I type in, I couldn't get to it.
What did you type in?
I typed in just Ensley first, I typed in history, and I typed in your first name and your last name.
Did you use Elizabeth or did you use Liz?
I think I used Elizabeth.
It's under Liz Inslee.
Liz, okay.
Yeah, if you go to... Oh, if I spell my own name right, that would help. Bam. Yeah, Liz Inslee, here are... So all the ones that we've done this semester obviously are in the classroom. And then there will be some later on. Like, because after spring break last semester, I had to record them all from home. So anyway, they're all labeled.
Okay.
So...
The exam, we don't use books, but on our quizzes, we are able to use our notes.
Well, yeah, the chapter books. The chapter quizzes, yeah, you can use your books on the chapter quizzes.
Okay.
And will we just send your notes for the chapter test?
Yeah, I mean, I have a review for you. I don't know what I'm looking for. Where's files? There's files. Oh, what's the name of your classroom? It helped go to your classroom. That's my online classroom. Now you only see the stuff in green, don't worry about the rest of it, but review for test 1 right here. It's already posted, so you just use that at your disposal, and yeah, it'll basically say, if it comes strictly from your book, it'll say from your book, read, over Bacon's Rebellion.
Okay.
But everything else you should be able to find in the lectures and the PowerPoint
All right.
for these type of tests.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there posted reading, or is that going to be on the review for what we need to review?
For your test? It's on the review. Yeah, it'll say from your book, read over Bacon's Rebellion.
Okay.
From your book, and because it has chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4.
Right.
So under chapter 1 or chapter 2, it'll say read over, or chapter 3, it'll say read over the founding of Georgia. In chapter 3. So it'll tell you which specific sections to read out of from your book.
Okay. And what events did you show this weekend?
Oh, I did. It was a big AQHA show up in Oklahoma, but so we did the halter and showmanship and this and that, and we made it to the championship class. We got reserve, and then and then there were 2 different English division sections, and she won grand champion of both of those.
Wow, that's so cool. That's
She
my
did.
horse.
Thank
She's a
you.
good horse.
She's the best horse I've ever owned. She's so cool.
That's so awesome. Did y'all win this all around?